I had the good fortune of liking most of my teachers when I was a kid. And my grade 1 teacher, Miss Weber, she may have been the cooperative condition for this to happen. It was her first year of teaching. There was no kindergarten school when I was growing up in my town. That's how long ago it was. So my first experience of school was grade 1, and there was Miss Weber. And she just loved what she was doing. You could tell, you know. Yeah, she just loved us to death every day. So I couldn't wait to go to school. And she was warm and caring. And so she was the benchmark, I'm pretty sure, with which I measured the next several years of teachers that I encountered. And some of them measured up to Miss Weber. Some of them didn't. But they measured up to her in very different ways in reflecting back on all of those teachers I had. And this was really the first time I had a role model outside of my immediate family and my extended family and all the people that my parents knew in this little town of 3,200 people. So she was a really big influence. So since then, which has been many years now, I've had the good fortune to meet many people, you know, in person, in books, in films, in news articles, who inspire me in the way that they embrace kindness, compassion, courage, fortitude, creativity, wisdom, according to their disposition and their personality, how they did that. What I've come to notice, especially in the past 4 years, is how precious and important the quality of humility is, and how this quality is what I value so highly in others, who I respect and I'm inspired by. So in retrospect, of course, I didn't know the word humility when I was 6 years old. I didn't know for a long time, but I see that that was what she was modeling every day for us. She was definitely focused on these little kids and their parents and families, day after day, year after year. She could have done what most teachers did in our town. They would bolt after 2 years because little Rocky Mountain House was just too boring. They wanted to go to the big city. She stayed. She got her fulfillment there. She didn't want to climb up and be the principal and be a somebody. She was happy being a grade 1 teacher. So the definition of humility from a dictionary point of view is, I really like this one, there's many, but this one is freedom from pride or ignorance. Freedom. The quality or state of being humble. So from a Buddhist worldview, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it's really interesting that this quality of humility, it's not spoken of in the 6 or the 10 perfections. It's not one of the 11 virtuous mental factors. And what I'd like to propose over these next several talks, it's going to take several talks to say what I'd like to say, what I've been thinking about humility, is that maybe humility is a byproduct of cultivating virtue and reducing afflicted mental states and learning from our life experiences. So the Buddha's teachings have a lot to say about humility's opposite, which is arrogance, conceit, pride, whatever word you like that works for you. So we'll definitely look at those negative mental states to find out how to reduce them and to eventually eliminate them. But this quality of humility is a quality that's important, obviously, for spiritual practitioners, but for anyone who lives on the planet, to cultivate it and to appreciate it in others. So as I've been looking around at what this is in the world and in spiritual life, I'd like to start with an article that I found very interesting. And it's an article that was published in the Mayo Clinic research papers. Let's see, it's written by someone by the name of James T. There's no last name. It's called Humility in the Practice of Medicine. So I'm going to pull out some of the points that I find are so interesting that have parallels in spiritual practice and life. So the article starts with, a faculty colleague once shared one of his teaching experiences with me. He described a medical student who was bright and well-read and who demonstrated above average skills for his level of training. This student, however, was slow to improve, unaccepting of criticism or feedback. He possessed many gifts but lacked humility. Red flag number 1. Watch out for the mind that resists criticism and feedback. I'm talking to myself when I'm saying these red flags, but it might help if you listen to that too. If asked to describe the characteristics of an excellent physician, many of us probably would not include humility at the top of the list. On the contrary, most would consider self-confidence and self-assurance as more important positive attributes. There is a fine distinction, however, between confidence and overconfidence, and between self-assurance and arrogance. In this essay, I'm going to describe some areas in medicine in which humility is essential and overconfidence is destructive. Red flag number 2. The overconfident physician tends to be self-satisfied and self-sufficient with his knowledge base. I'll just say there, I'll replace his with there. The humble physician is all too aware of the limitations of their personal fund of knowledge, but is also aware of the limitations of all sources of information. The humble physician, however, avoids the naively optimistic view that all or even most clinical activities can be directed by randomized trials. So there's that red flag number 2, self-satisfied and self-sufficient. So we hear this from our teachers in Buddhist teachings, We hear about the person who feels like, well, I've heard this teaching so many times before. I don't need to listen to this. I've got it all figured out. That's for baby beginners. Yikes, there's a flag. An underappreciated skill that a physician should master is the ability to recognize one's own limitations. Take note, Dharma practitioners. In conjunction with our spiritual teacher, we develop the skill to understand our current capacity. In this article, the research they did, they found that most physicians are unable to assess their own level of knowledge accurately. Red flag number 3, the importance of cultivating a connection with a spiritual teacher and practicing as advised. The humble physician is not ashamed to admit ignorance and is not too proud to request assistance from consultants. This is wise advice that we hear all the time from His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Venerable Children and any other authentic teachers that you encounter. Knowledgeable physicians are more aware of their limitations than are less knowledgeable physicians. So take note. Reasons to put effort into listening, reflecting, and meditating on the teachings. One highly accomplished academic commented to me that the more he studies his subject, the more he appreciates how little he really knows. Unlike the self-satisfied physician, the humble physician is never satisfied that he knows enough medicine or that he knows everything about his patient. Good advice to spiritual practitioners too. I remember I was in my 4th year of university, so I was just about to graduate, and I encountered one of my teachers in the hallway who I just absolutely, he was number 1 role model for me. And he was our choral director. And he just stopped me in the hall and said, "What are you doing, when you're finished?" And I told him, and he said, I've found that as I've gotten older, over time I know less and less. And that as I get older, people expect me to know more and more. And then he walked away. That was a pretty potent teaching. One of the least heard phrases at an academic medical center is, "I don't know." Even rarer are statements, "I was wrong," or "I made a mistake." So physicians, at least until recently, are conditioned to view mistakes as the basis for judgment or threat, usually with good reason. However, a medical mistake can be an opportunity to re-examine the process of care. When viewed cooperatively and in a non-judgmental fashion, mistakes can be the catalyst for improvement. Nonetheless, it takes a humble, self-effacing physician to admit a mistake, and an equal humble approach to avoid the trappings of finger-pointing and blame. We know this from our teachers as well. Mistakes for Buddhist practitioners are situations to purify, and with a heartfelt regret to see these as opportunities to learn from, to acknowledge our choices at that point in time, to forgive that younger self, and to commit with more energy the intention to reduce the frequency of the habit or to determine never to do that ever again in this life. The article concludes with the author saying that he thinks that the lessons of humility can be taught through acculturation. And he says medical teachers should model the virtue of humility by demonstrating patient-centered behavior. This type of behavior must include an I don't know or I was wrong on morning rounds, or an empathetic patient interview observed by students. The students and residents can then witness these practices in patient-centered behavior and then develop their own habits of humility. So I think this is good. I think this is good if you're not a spiritual person, that kind of approach. But I think in addition to having anything modeled, then discussions have to happen later on, like what words were used, what words were not used, what was the tone of voice, what was the body language that demonstrated authentic humility. So I thought I'd end today's discussion on humility with an article in the New York Times that came out in the middle of August. There's so many examples of people demonstrating humility. Most of them don't make it to the New York Times or any newspaper, but I'm going to encourage you to watch for these examples in your life. This one is a very nice example. I'm sure these people didn't phone the New York Times and say, hey, I want you to know what we're doing. I'm sure that someone knew someone who pointed them to this couple. So the title of the article is, We Didn't See Our Kids for 109 Days. 2 Manhattan doctors sent their girls to Singapore while they worked the front lines, and then the country closed its borders. So this is a story by Gavin Jenkins. In March, when it became clear that New York City would become a COVID-19 hotspot, Elaine Yang and David Weir panicked over how to take care of their daughters, Ansley, 3 years old, and Adeline, 1-year-old. Yang is an anesthesiologist at the Hospital for Special Surgery with a specialty in critical care medicine, and her husband Weir is a critical care medicine pulmonologist at New York Presbyterian Lower Manhattan Hospital. They didn't want their nanny, who is over 50, to risk her health traveling across New York City each day, so they paid her to stay home. Naturally, they wanted their daughters to remain in Manhattan, but what if one of the 2 doctors contracted the virus on the front lines? Yang expected to work in an intensive care unit like Weir, and neither could juggle strenuous ICU shifts and raise their girls alone. What if they both tested positive for COVID-19, or worse, they died? The possibilities terrified them. Faced with this issue, some New York City doctors sent their children to stay with family in neighboring states. However, Yang's parents lived in her native Taiwan, and Weir's relatives in New Jersey and Ohio. And his parents have health issues that would put them at risk if they came in contact with COVID-19. So eventually they decided to send their girls to her sister's home in Singapore. And as soon as they got their girls to Singapore, the Singapore government issued a partial lockdown and closed its borders to foreigners. From late March to early May, the couple focused only on their work. Yang worked weekends and regularly switched from day shift to night shift with little rest in between. When Weir and Yang saw each other, it was in passing. They sent supportive text messages and prepared each other's meals, but Yang said she still felt lonely. It was traumatic, she said. You'd work 18 hours and then eat dinner in the kitchen by yourself, and you just keep thinking, oh my God, what am I going to go into in the hospital tomorrow? Weir placed a bed in his office and for a stretch only went home to shower. He fell into a routine which was wake up, FaceTime with the girls, work for 14 hours, eat standing up, get some sleep, and do it all again. We were seeing people our age who have kids dying in the hospital from COVID, Weir said. So this is getting a little bit long, but I'd like to finish with one Dharma antidote to work with this, the opposite of humility, which is arrogance. And this is something that Venerable Children unpacked a few years in BBC talks from the Gems of Wisdom from the 7th Dalai Lama. And one verse asks, what is the wild horse that throws one from the mountain? One is ascending. What do you say? When you're progressing in the path, what is the uncontrolled that makes you fall down? Pride, arrogance, conceit. Puffing ourselves up. Arrogance that thinks we're superior, and we dwell on our good qualities. They always say that at the beginning of the path, we aren't arrogant because we don't know anything. But as we learn a little bit of Dharma, then it's very easy for us to get puffed up. Maybe it's our first time to take someone to the chapel. Because then new people are around, and then we can explain this and we can explain that. And because we know this much more than they do, they look up to us. And then why do we think we know more than others do? Or why do we think we know more than we do? And there's two reasons for this. Well, when we know a little bit, we know this from our experience, we think we know more than we actually know. Because we may know the words, but we don't really know the meaning, or we know the meaning intellectually, but we haven't really thought about it much. Or a lot of times we know the words, but you think you know the meaning, but actually you don't have a clue what it means. And there's a totally wrong idea running, and that's what we teach to other people. That's scary. So here's the antidote, and here's what to do. It's your homework for the next time. To reflect on who taught us what we know. So in any case, when we're teaching the Dharma, there's what's there to be arrogant about anyway? We didn't invent the Dharma. We learned it from other people, so getting puffed up, thinking I'm a great practitioner, I'm a great teacher, I've realized this, I've realized that. Look, there's all these students around me, they think I'm wonderful. Who do we think we are? The Buddha? None of the Dharma came from us, so there's no reason to ever get arrogant about knowing something. And similarly, no reason to get arrogant over, even if we have realizations, I don't know what that's about, and I'll speak for myself. So if you have genuine realizations, as we hear from our teachers, you're not going to talk about it. And if you have realizations, you're going to be more humble. It'll just stand out. There's no blurb in the e-news that you just realized something. So there's the homework. Reflect on what you've learned since you were a tiny baby, your earliest memory. Who taught us these things? So many things we've learned. We didn't come in knowing them. We might have had, of course, we had predispositions. But generate this list. It'll be amazing how long it is. Informally and informally. Do it again and again and again.